Hi, I'm Selena, and I'm from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Dr. Jud Brewer. And I'm going to ask Dr. Jud or Jud to explain exactly what it is that he does, and um, and why, pretty much why I've invited him here to speak about his new book. And
I'd,
go ahead.
I'd be happy to, and thanks for having me. So, I'm an addiction psychiatrist and neuroscientist. I'm an associate professor at Brown University in the schools of public health and the medical school there. I'm also the executive medical director of behavioral health at ShareCare, where we develop digital therapeutics to help people overcome afflictions such as smoking, overeating, and anxiety. And I wrote this book based a lot on some things that I never learned in medical school or residency about anxiety. For example, that anxiety can be driven like other habits, like smoking and overeating.
Okay, and can you can you tell us more about your book? And what can readers expect from your latest book?
Well, the book is set up kind of in three parts, actually four parts. The part zero kind of sets up the background. For example, we've seen a huge spike in anxiety over the last year due to the pandemic. And it gives people a background on why our brains don't like uncertainty, how that can lead to anxiety, and how that's just kind of an unhelpful spin-off of our survival mechanisms around fear learning and things like that.
And could you tell us the name of your book? I'm sorry.
Sure. The book is called Unwinding Anxiety.
Yes. Okay.
So once the background section kind of gives people a sense of how their minds work, then it's got three steps or three parts that people can use to actually work with anxiety and any other habit for that matter, so that they can step out of the process.
Okay. So what was the inspiration for unwinding anxiety?
Well, I had my own anxiety, especially in the end of college, beginning of medical school, and during residency. And it's funny, at the end of college, I didn't even know that I had anxiety. I thought I had some GI symptoms, which I won't go into the details of, but basically my body was letting me know that there was something amiss. And, in medical school, I learned how to prescribe medications for anxiety. But when I started practicing as a psychiatrist, I was struggling to help my own patients with anxiety. There's the best medications out there. There's this term called number needed to treat, which means how many people you need to give a treatment to before one person benefits. And that number for medications is 5.2, meaning I was playing the medication lottery. For every 5 patients I would give medications to, one of them would show a significant reduction in symptoms. So I started looking for other ways to help people with anxiety. And I found this literature that dates back to the 1980s. My lab at Brown studies habit change and how to help people break bad habits. And it turns out that some folks had suggested that anxiety could be driven in the same manner as other habits. And when I saw that, this light bulb went off in my head, and I said, "Oh, wait, I know how to work with habits. Maybe we could apply this to anxiety as well." And so, as a scientist and as a psychiatrist, I wanted to see treatments that could benefit. And so my lab has been developing digital therapeutics, ways to help deliver treatments through apps. We'd done stuff for smoking and eating. And so we developed this app also called Unwinding Anxiety to help people work with anxiety. And then we studied it and we got some remarkable results. We got a 57% reduction in one clinical study of anxious physicians. We saw a 67% reduction in anxiety in people with generalized anxiety disorder. And I was also starting to see how this was actually playing out in my clinic. And in that last study, we could actually calculate that number needed to treat. So for medications, it's 5.2. For our digital therapeutic, for the Unwinding Anxiety app, it was 1.6. So
Wow.
that really blew us away. And so I started bringing all of this together, what I've been learning in my lab, what I've been learning in my clinic, and also what this digital therapeutic was helping us learn about the mechanisms of how to overcome anxiety. And I wanted to put a book together to help people be able to do this for themselves. And so that's what the Unwinding Anxiety book is all about, giving people this 3-step process to be able to recognize and overcome their own anxiety.
Wow. So what were the steps that you took to bring this from initial inspiration to a finished product?
Well, there were a number of steps.
Yes.
The first was that I had to understand the theory. I needed to understand where anxiety is coming from. I can certainly get a sense for that working with my clinic patients, but really having an overarching theory to work from is the hallmark of good science. You need to have a hypothesis to test. You need to have a mechanism to study. So I started bringing together some of the mechanistic work that my lab had been doing with mindfulness training, with what this work in the 1980s was suggesting about the anxiety being driven as a habit. And once I had a theoretical model that I could test, and it's a very simple model. It suggests that anxiety, can trigger the mental behavior of worrying. And that worrying actually feeds back and drives more anxiety, because even though it makes us feel like we're in control or at least doing something, it actually makes us more anxious. So we could actually test that and bring that together with some of the neuroscience that's been out there, which suggests that really the best way to change a habit is through changing the reward value of a certain behavior. And you can't just tell yourself to change a behavior. It'd be great if we could, because then my job would be easy as a psychiatrist. I could just tell my patients to stop smoking and stop overeating, and they would stop. But the way it works is that they really have to pay attention to see how rewarding or unrewarding that behavior is. And when they see that, that reward value in their brains drops, and that makes it much easier for them to change behavior. So for example, we'd done studies with smoking where we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment for smoking by helping people pay attention, notice what it feels like, what it tastes like, what it smells like to smoke a cigarette. Cigarettes don't taste very good. And so they could start to become disenchanted with that behavior. We did another study with overeating, helping people pay attention to how rewarding or unrewarding it is to overeat. And it only took about 10 or 15 times of people really paying attention very, very carefully as they overeat for them to as they overate for them to change that behavior. And we delivered that treatment through an app called Eat Right Now. And so here we were even starting to apply this. We could apply this to the same theory to anxiety. So once we had a theory, we needed a treatment delivery mechanism. So I developed this Unwinding Anxiety app through what was formerly a company called Mind Sciences, but then merged with ShareCare. And then with that app in hand, my lab could study it. So we could do NIH-funded trials and see how well it worked. And as I mentioned, it works pretty well, surprisingly well, better than we expected.
Wow. Are there any quick tips on, on unwinding anxiety?
I would say one quick tip is to several. So one is to be able to recognize worry as a mental behavior. That's one that a lot of people haven't really paid attention to or don't notice. Another quick tip is to see what we're actually getting from worrying. Often, it seems like it's productive, or there's this myth around performance anxiety where you've got to be anxious to perform well. No science backs that up. It's a good heuristic. It's on the internet. And so people believe that it's true. So helping people really explore what it's like, when they perform well. Do they need the anxiety to perform well? The short answer there is anxiety actually hinders performance. And another quick tip, and this is the whole third part of the book, is helping people discover their natural superpower of curiosity. So when they're anxious, I give some pragmatic tools for people to bring curiosity in so that they can actually work with the anxiety. And, given a choice, our brain's going to pick something that's more rewarding. And it's no brainer when we compare anxiety to curiosity. Curiosity wins every time.
Really? That's an interesting thought. Wow. Oh, so what is your favorite research story relating to the book?
Wow. I've learned so much from from doing the research for this. One is, and I would say I hear a version of this a lot, which is, when when people start learning about how their minds work, these are people in my clinical studies, they hadn't really noticed that anxiety can be driven like a habit, and they get these aha moments, and they come back, whether it's my clinic or in my research studies, they come back in and they say, how did I not see this before? How did I not notice that anxiety could be driven this way? So I would say, that's one of my favorite stories. And I would say another one is when people come back and say, they tried everything to work with their anxiety, that, they'd had it for decades, and, just helping them understand how their mind worked, help them be able to work with their minds. I'll add one more favorite one, where I remember a woman saying, as she learned how her mind worked, she would remind herself that, this is just her survival brain trying to help her survive, and it was spinning out an anxiety. So she would just use this little mantra, oh, that's just my brain, as a way to remind herself, oh, that's just this thing it's spinning off. It's not, I don't have to believe it.
Interesting. Okay, and what cool facts and findings didn't make it into the book, but you love discovering?
well, I put a lot into the book.
Okay.
And one of the findings that we didn't really get to fit a lot into it, and this was, I actually explained a little bit of this in my previous book. I wrote a book called The Craving Mind that kind of details a lot of the neuroscience that my lab had studied. And so one of the pieces that we're just starting to explore now is how we can look at the specific reward value of worrying itself. And so we're actually creating a tool that we're embedding into the Unwinding Anxiety app and starting to study. And so that's one of the pieces that build on some of our eating research, where we're now starting to see that and be able to study that and bring that forward. And so that piece came just after my publication deadline, basically, and so it didn't make it into the book.
Okay. Can you actually talk yourself out of worrying?
I wish we could. I think probably a small minority of people can do that, where they can kind of convince themselves or tell themselves to stop. There's actually a great skit from Bob Newhart, who was a comedian who was well known in the 70s, and I think. And he had this skit called Just Stop It, where he played this therapist, and this woman walks into his office, and she starts talking about all these, problems, I have this, and he says, just stop it, just stop it. And, that was the whole skit, was basically, wouldn't it be great if we could just tell ourselves to stop? Unfortunately, our brains don't work that way.
Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, we're hoping to do some more neuroscience research, linking up some of these digital therapeutics and some of the concepts that I put forward in the book with brain mechanisms. We've just started to scratch the surface of how mindfulness and of how awareness helps us change our brains, and how that directly relates to behavior change. So, for example, another thing that didn't make it into the book was a study we did with people who are trying to quit smoking. And we could give them this Craving to Quit app, where we would help them learn mindfulness as a way to quit smoking. And we found that specifically helped quiet down a part of the brain that gets really active when people get caught up in craving. And the more that brain region got quiet, the more they dropped the number of cigarettes they were smoking. So we're hoping to do more neuroscience research to link up both, these same mechanisms with overeating as well as worrying.
So you plan to write a book about that?
Who knows?
Okay. So what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
I would say I love to write, and it's not that I'm constantly writing books. These books tend to go through this maturation period where I'm not even planning to write a book, and then suddenly it happens, and my brain's like, okay, time to write a book, and then I just sat down and write the book. So I would say one of the hardest parts is really matching. So I try to bring as much levity as possible to these challenging topics. Anxiety is not exactly the most lighthearted, joyful topic. So finding a match between, balance between bringing some levity in and helping people see that, I really take this topic very seriously as a scientist, as a psychiatrist, but also, so bringing that balance between the seriousness of the subject, but also trying to write in a way that makes these topics accessible, gives pragmatic tips, isn't just writing a bunch of scientific jargon. I think those are the pieces that are most challenging and actually really fun. I really like the challenge of keeping things simple, but not oversimplifying. I think it's a detriment to society to oversimplify science, and I don't think we need to. I think it's more a matter of not being. I won't say that also. I'll just say not being lazy, but that's probably a better way to say it. It takes a little more work to really think of good ways to convey concepts in a way that everybody can understand them, instead of just kind of sticking with science speak. And that's a really fun challenge that I enjoy.
And that it kind of leads into my next question, which is what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers? And I think the other writers here I'm talking about are people in your situation, people who are like scientists or who are subject experts and who just want to write a book about their subject.
I think the biggest thing I would say, and I've learned this from my own experience, is to don't go in trying to write a book, but go just live your experience for a period of time until you know it really, really well. You know it in your bones. And then that'll make the writing much, much easier, because you'll be writing from your own experience. You'll be writing from your own wisdom, and it'll just flow much more easily. The other piece of advice I would give, and I've practiced this myself, I wrote a little bit about it at the end of this book, of the Unwinding Anxiety book, is to really notice, start to dial in and use your body as a feedback mechanism to see, when am I starting to get forced or tight or kind of trying too much, versus kind of being very open and kind of in the flow, in the zone of writing. And I think that's something that can be really helpful for, having something just really come out in a way that is much easier to read as compared to something that feels forced.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now I'm going to ask you things about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Maybe one thing is that I like to surf. And I say, but most people don't know that because I've only picked it up in the last couple of years. So being at Brown gave me the opportunity to be closer to the shore, as compared to living in Worcester. And as part of that, I picked up surfing about 3 years ago and absolutely love it. So that's probably one thing most people don't know.
Okay, that's good. What is or are your passions when you're not writing? How do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things that you love?
Well, I would say I love doing science, but that's part of my job. So I'll place that to the side. As I mentioned, I love surfing. I also love mountain biking. I like playing music. I grew up playing the violin. I don't play enough these days, but I absolutely love doing that. And I love reading. And I love spending time with my wife and having some deep conversations. And I would say it's critical. All of those things are actually critical to help me maintain balance and to be able to write. I think, having those pieces in my life really helps enrich it, makes it deeper, and really supports the writing process.
Okay. Now, what does your writing space look like? What do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
I have a desk that's this nice, I found this nice thick piece of, I think it's mango wood, at some, just made a desk out of it basically. And so it's this beautiful dark, slab of wood that's just, feels, I love the feel of wood, love the, natural things. And so it's basically just that, a keyboard and a nice big screen, my plugged into my laptop. And that's, that and a good cup of herbal tea is, and I'm good to go.
Do you have any favorite foods or drinks? You said herbal tea, but do you have any favorite foods that you like to have with you?
I like a variety of foods, but generally I eat a plant-based diet. And so I try to eat food that is, not processed, that's, what people call it clean, just not a lot of sugar, things like that. That's something that's really helped support me, where I'm not having these ups and downs from getting a sugar rush and crashing or whatnot. But there are, everything from, my wife and I like to make our own homemade kale chips. So from that to, we actually brew our own kombucha. So, just the simple, kale chips, kombucha, tea, things like that.
Okay. And when you're writing, do you prefer music or silence?
Definitely silence.
Yeah. Okay. And writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to either help them or hinder them with their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
Both. They help and hinder. So we have two cats, and the one that likes to kind of sit up on my desk or even on my wife's desk when we're working. Her name is Julian of Norwich. She's named after a Christian mystic, and she's an absolute delight to have, by my side when I'm writing.
Okay. So she helps and hinders you.
Yeah, sometimes she'll want more attention than I'd like to give her in the moment.
Yes, cats do that, don't they? And I just have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to give Annie's a little plug like I do in every video. We're at 65 James Street in Worcester, and you can call us at 508 796 5613, and you can order any books that you want, including Dr. Jud's books. And you can also email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com, and we'll get you the books. And where else could people get your books?
So certainly they can find them on Amazon or whatnot, but I would encourage folks to buy from their local booksellers. So, like Annie's and others. The other place that people can find me and in the book and the apps that I've been talking about, I have a website called drjud.com, drjud.com.
Okay, and that was my next question, is how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Oh, thank you. Well, so the website, I'm also on Twitter a little bit at Jud Brewer, JUDBREWER, and Instagram at Dr Jud, DR.JUD.
Okay, great. Well, that's actually all I have for you today. So thank you very much for being with me and for doing this interview. And so you're in Worcester, so hopefully you'll be able to get over to our store, and when we do some book signings, you'll be able to get over and sign some books.
I'd love to help, and thanks for having me.
That would be great. Thank you very much, and we will be seeing you.